What's your "we need to leave now" moment? A few instances from mountain climbing/backpacking. On the summit of Mount Adams, a 12,500-foot, dormant, volcano in Washington state. The wind suddenly picked up very strongly as we were packing up lunch and about to descend. We looked up and saw what I can only describe as two horizontal tornadoes sucking up loose snow from around us. We basically ran/fell down the 50-foot snow slope from the small summit to a larger plateau below as the vortices descended to where we were just a minute before. We booked it across the plateau to the main slope, and then did a glissade, controlled sitting descent using an ice axe for rudder/brake, down a 3,000 vertical foot snow field in 15 minutes. It took us 4 hours to climb up the same snow field. On a 13,000+ foot ridge in the Sierra Nevada mountains, in Sequoia National Park. Light puffy clouds in the morning quickly built up to thunderstorms as we crossed the pass to get to the camp for that night. We could actually feel and smell the static electricity in the air as lightning began to strike. Again, descended as fast as humanly possible. I live near the Sierras, and the storms there are no joke. They're not as big as ones out in the eastern US, but the winds can be very strong, hail can mess you up out there, flooding is a huge risk, and lightning strikes plus fires can get very bad. I was hiking in New Hampshire when all of a sudden tens of thousands of harvestmen started running down the trees as far as the eye could see. The trees were alive with them and they were all getting the hell out of Dodge. The forest floor quickly became a moving carpet of these big-ass spiders, all running as fast as they could down the mountain. Needless to say, we followed their example. We made it back to our car, but there was a huge thunderstorm. The day had been clear and sunny and nothing was predicted in the weather forecast. It came and went so quickly, but it was fierce. I woke up to the smell of burnt rubber and it turned out to be that my garage was on fire. I woke up everybody in the house, 9 people including a baby, and we got the hell out of there. Luckily the fire didn't make it into the house and we had it covered by insurance, but it was scary as hell. I went to college in downtown Chicago and took the L tracks home after an evening class. It wasn't too late, maybe like 8 p.m. This one time there were only a few other people in the train car I was in, and so everyone was spread out. At one of the stops this shady-looking guy gets on, and even though there were plenty of empty rows where he could sit alone, he goes and sits next to a woman. Not 2 seconds later that woman gets up and immediately goes to another car. This same guy then gets up from the seat, turns around towards where I'm sitting. Mind you, like the woman, I was sitting near the window and had my backpack on the seat next to me. He sits down on my backpack without saying a word. Shocked, I yank my bag from under him, and that's when I see that he has this weird silver finger cover thing over his entire pointer finger. This ornament finger thing looked heavy and it had intricate carved dragons all over it, except at the end where a nail would be there was like a long claw-like dagger. I look at this guy and he is just staring straight ahead, didn't even flinch with me pulling my backpack, plus he reeked of alcohol. I then noticed this other guy who was seated across from us and was staring right at me, mouthing, "Get up now." So that's what I did. I used my backpack to kind of buffer me from him and pushed myself out of the aisle as the train was approaching the last stop. I left that car and had so much adrenaline pulsing that I kept going through other train cars to get as much distance as I could, until the train came to a stop and I ran the F of there and down the stairs, where I alerted a CTA employee about him. It was really scary, and after that my boyfriend got me a taser and pepper spray that I would literally hold in my hands so that everyone could see when I rode the trains at that hour. Riding with brother-in-law to help him buy a couch he found on Craigslist. Pull into a very shady looking apartment complex and notice a few people up front watching us pull in and suddenly calling someone with their cell. Bad body language all around. Lizard brain says it's an ambush. Tell Bill and we turn around and leave. That night on the news there was a shootout because dudes were setting people up to be robbed at the back of the complex. For big ticket items, like cars, I do the sale in the parking lot in front of the police station. For cell phones I do the sale right inside the actual lobby of the police station. That's the best place, selling or buying. If you're ever selling or buying a gun you can ask the police station if it's okay with them to have someone oversee the exchange in the parking lot. I was in Camden, New Jersey, 1991. Hanging with some people I was familiar with and my friend T. T and I were just talking, hanging out on the block while the older kids were selling to passing cars. For a couple weeks I had been trying to convince T to stop hanging on these couple blocks. There was too much turf in Camden. Always someone or other rolling through slow or staring from the end of the block. Gang S. Anyway, one evening I see this car go by 3 times. I knew that was it. I could feel it in my gut. I saw them turn in again and then start to go a little faster. Grabbed T and got low behind a burned out car and made myself the smallest target. 3 dealers died that night. I'm pretty sure 1 or 2 of the guys in the car died, too. It was a effing mess. I booked it to the bus depot and stayed out of Camden for a couple months. T was fine that night but died a couple months later in other Gang S. Effing Gang S. Went off-roading with a friend in an area he'd gone to the week before. First we explored the stuff he'd already done, but decided to finish off by exploring some new areas. We get to the top of this crest and enjoy the view for a second before both looking down and seeing about 10 cars in a ravine. We were both ready to nope the F out of that. I was on a tour at the Korean Demilitarized Zone, DMZ, between North Korea and South Korea, back in 2010. We were about to enter the Joint Security Area, JSA, where the actual border is. If you've seen newscasts showing light blue houses separating the 2 Koreas, that's the JSA. Our last stop before entering the JSA was a gift shop. As we shuffled off the tour bus, a bunch of US military personnel came out of nowhere, holding their weapons, and ordered us to get back on the bus as quickly as possible. Our tour bus made a beeline out of the DMZ. It was clear that we won't be going closer to the border. After a brief stop at another point of interest, in a safer area, our tour bus hightailed it back to Seoul. We left so quickly that we still had our unissued visitor badges with us. We returned them to the tour guide, who exchanged them for our waiver forms. They were never submitted to the US military because of what happened. I still have that form today. It basically says, we're not responsible if you get shot by the North Koreans or the Chinese People's Liberation Army. It hadn't been updated for a while. So, what happened? 2 months before our tour, there was a South Korean naval ship that was mysteriously torpedoed near the inter-Korean maritime border. South Korea wanted to blame North Korea, who denied involvement. So an investigation was launched. On the day of our tour, South Korea called a press conference to formally accuse North Korea of the sinking. Nobody seemed to know that was going to happen. That press conference happened at the same time that we were at the DMZ. So we were immediately ordered away to avoid possible retaliation by the North Koreans. A tour group would be easy pickings. I don't know what the odds are for something like this. But I will forever have that story to tell, and can claim to have been ordered off a military base by soldiers near North Korea. Was in a bar on the rooftop deck. Some dudes started getting rowdy near the entrance to the deck. I could see the escalation happening and I told the gal I had been talking to follow me and we went down the back stairs through the kitchen. Two things happened that night. First, one of the guys got stabbed. In the head. Like through the top of his skull. Super glad I got out of there when I did. Second, I got laid that night. She thought it was super cool to escape through the kitchen. When some guy came into Waffle House looking for a piece of paper that the waitress accidentally threw away. The guy said he was going home to get his gun that was under his mattress and come back to Waffle House. My friend and I got our checks immediately, paid and left. We were not hanging around. Me and a girlfriend were making out in my car somewhere in downtown. Some empty parking lot at night. I happened to look out the window and see a guy walking up to us in the dark from a distance. I decided not to wait around. As soon as I started the car, he started running towards us. I took off as fast as I could. I was in a bar in a Mexican town that was ruled by the cartel. This was maybe 20 years ago. My friends and I were having fun drinking cheap beer and taking shots. Suddenly, the group of guys sitting at the table next to us got up and started readying their pistols and they all started to face toward the entrance. They were obviously expecting some sort of ambush or something. My friends and I didn't even have to say anything, we just got the F out and ran till we were far, far away. We never got the story about what was up with that, but we returned to the bar the next day and it was closed. It never opened again. Was in Paris November 2015 on vacation. My girlfriend and I were in a small pub having a drink before heading back to the hotel. Most of the pub was watching the soccer game and we weren't really paying attention. All of a sudden we noticed the whole pub went quiet, and we saw the news on the TV about the terror attacks. The bartender could speak English and said to us, "Are you tourists? You need to get back to your hotel now." We thankfully were close enough to run back and we basically hid there with the blinds closed and lights off watching it happen on TV, terrified because we had no idea how far the attacks were going to spread. The scariest part is that had briefly considered getting tickets to the EODM concert that night. Had we gone, who knows what could have happened. As a kid, the torch from the Beijing Olympics was being run through an area near where we lived. We went to a viewing spot where they were holding a barbecue, so there were a lot of people gathered there. Now it's important to remember that China was under a lot of scrutiny for human rights abuse. As such, there were a number of pro-China supporters who had brought flags and such to the viewing. The whole thing had a bit of a tense atmosphere, but so far nothing bad happened. Then, shortly before the torch was due to arrive, a busload of anti-China demonstrators rocked up. They started silently walking out holding signs condemning the abuse. And the pro-China crowd absolutely lost it. There was a barricade separating the two groups, and we were between the barricade and the pro-China crowd. I distinctly remember a group of them running towards the barricade throwing water bottles and such, oblivious to the fact that they were about to trample a kid. My folks and I ran and left the area, watching the torch in a less crowded spot down the road. At a big college party. Talking to a guy. He leaned in and whispered, "Things are about to get rapey." I laughed to defuse the situation. Then I politely excused myself, found my friend and we immediately left. Stopped at a Burger King for lunch with a couple friends when the cops showed up because someone threatened to shoot someone. The supposed gunman left right before we walked in. We left the Burger King and just as we crossed the street, we heard gunshots coming from the place and ran for a couple blocks. Was in Oaxaca, Mexico during the protests/violence that occurred. One day my dad and I were in the Central Plaza. It's mid-afternoon and about to rain and he's on the phone with my mom. I look around and realize we're alone. Nobody is in the plaza. We're a couple of Americans and also the only people there. I tell my dad to get off the phone, we need to go. He waves me off. I tell him to turn around and look. He realizes we're alone, hangs up, and we need to go. 20 minutes later the local resistance takeover of TV and radio stations in the city started. The finish line of the Boston bombing. We were standing on the opposite side of the street in between the bombs. Thought the first bomb was just a smoke cannon or something similar. When the second one went off we realized what was happening and ran down a side alley. We tried to hide in the doorway of a hotel's back entrance and the people already hiding there wouldn't let us in. They physically pushed us out of the doorway and told us to find somewhere else to go. Practically spat at us to F off. We had no idea what direction was safe to go, but thankfully we were okay. The initial 15 minutes after it happened were terrifying, but we just keep moving to GTFO dodge as soon as we could. Driving a friend home after a group dinner at Buffalo Wild Wings. We pull into friend's apartment and I notice a car following us. They pull in the apartment and park beside us. We sit a couple of minutes just talking when I realize the guy in the next car who is alone still hasn't got out. I told my friend something didn't feel right. We back out and the car follows us. I knew a bunch of back road and hit those quick enough to lose the guy. Once he was gone I took my friend back home and watched her go in safely. Was in Chicago, got off a train station and a homeless guy came up to myself and my friend. He said he was really depressed, wanted to kill himself and wanted a hug. Had no idea what to do, but then he put his arms around our necks and put us all into a hug. I couldn't get out of the hug. I tried to leave. His arm was wrapped around my neck tightly. Eventually he asked us to come with him to the shops. I asked him if he wanted us to buy him something. He said no, he had the money. We walk with him towards the shop, so uncomfortable. He had a duffel bag and said he'd pay, but he just wanted us to go with him to the shop. Once we were outside the shop, I told my friend let's get out of here. He started going into his bag and that's when we legged it. I had no idea what he was going to grab. He could have been harmless, but the fact that we couldn't leave his hug earlier remains with me. I can still feel his arm around my neck. I was driving home from my shift as a bartender and needed to stop for gas. I'm filling up and I notice there's a sedan parked over at the diesel pumps. Lights off, but clearly two guys sitting in the car. When my car finished filling up I went into the store, hoping these guys would leave. I asked the guy behind the counter how long they'd been there, and he hadn't even noticed them. I stayed until another guy pulled up to the pumps and walked in, but they were still there when I left. I checked the news the next morning and there was a robbery at a gas station nearby around the time I was going home. I don't know if it was those same guys trying to take down another place, but they were giving me bad vibes. I took a field ecology class where we went to a semi-remote area to do some field work. It was approaching midnight, and I was in a car with my instructor and two classmates and we were heading down the highway back to our base camp. At some point, my instructor realized she took a wrong turn, so we kept driving, waiting for an exit to show up. We spotted this little gravel road to the right, still on the highway, weird but okay, and thought it would lead to a street or exit, so we turned into it and entered the super shady, forested area. Rather than taking us to a street, the road took us to a broken down wooden cabin, with broken but boarded up windows and bunch of white vans and cars, all parked in really odd angles. The scene was way too weird to process coherently. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end and the voice in my head screamed, "Get out." We didn't see anyone, but there was definitely something, or someone, present, watching us. I said out loud, "Is anyone else getting the feeling that we need to get the F out of here?" My instructor and classmates all went, "Yep." I've never seen anyone make a U-turn faster than my instructor did that night. Dr. Random road in the middle of a highway in a remote location led us to a shady cabin with weird paranormal vibes. We made a U-turn and got out of there. Once while my brother, myself and some friends were at a bar in a town that I'm not very familiar with, I got really bad vibes from two guys that were drunk and getting loud with each other. I don't know why, but I got that gut feeling that we needed to leave, so I got up, went and told these guys that we were leaving, and so we did. Well, the next day I hear from someone else that I know, and he said that he showed up at the exact same bar a while after we left and that the place was swarming with cops, emergency vehicles, etc. And what he basically said was that when he asked someone what was going on, they told him that two guys were fighting in the parking lot and that one pulled a knife out and stabbed the other one. That's all he said, but I have no doubt in my mind that it was the same two guys that I had noticed earlier. I often wonder what happened, if the one that got stabbed died and so on. But yeah, anyway, that was one time where I knew I had to GTFO.